Okay, we're going to be hearing House Bill 857. If you want to speak for or against this legislation, there's a legal pad up here that you need to sign up. We've got enough for a quorum, but we're going to take just a second on this. Mr. Shorty. All right, we're ready to get started. Before we get started, let's bow our head for a moment of prayer. Gracious Heavenly Father, we again thank you for another day. We ask that you lead, guide, and direct us in all the things that we say and do to the benefit of this state and to the people of this state. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Okay, we're here to hear House Bill 857, and the author is offering a substitute to the original bill. Is there anyone that doesn't have a copy of the bill, the substitute, to look at? We have sent for some more copies. Representative Scott, if you want to go over to the podium there and explain your bill, we'll be glad to listen to what you have to say here.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the wake of 2-year-old Jasmine Green last year in Clayton County that died in a daycare van after she was left in the van, I decided to come up with this bill, and the bill basically states that the Department of Early Care and Learning on Early Care and Education Programs and other matters as to require daycare centers to have child safety alarms installed in vehicles used to transport children. And as the term child safety alarm means an ignition-based alarm system approved by the department that ultimately prompts the driver to inspect the vehicle for children before exiting the vehicle. And that is basically what the bill states. Want them to be able to have some way of not leaving kids on the daycare vans, not leaving kids on vans and buses after the wake of Jasmine Green death. And we know that we have had many other deaths in Georgia and all around the world with kids being left on daycare vans after they have gone on field trips and gone out, and daycare providers come back and somewhere or another they forget to check the bus and they leave kids on the bus, and it results in the summertime of kids dying from heat exhaustion. And that's basically the bill.
Okay. We have some questions here. Number 15.
Thank you, Representative Scott, for bringing this bill to us. Let me ask you a question. I'm not familiar with a child safety alarm. Like if I get in my truck now and I don't buckle my seat belt, it beep, beep, beep. Is this something that beeps continuously? How does this safety alarm work?
Well, I don't really know how the safety alarm works, but I know that other states have imposed this legislation, and what it does is it speaks to them from reading some of the other definitions of other bills in other states, and it asks them, have you checked the bus? You know, just an audible thing, asking them have they checked the bus to make sure all the kids are off the bus. Wisconsin have one, Tennessee have a bill, and Wisconsin have one, and Florida.
Well, I think it'd be a great safety measure, but I mean, I just wondered how it worked and whether the driver was sitting up there that there'd be something beeping until he went and undone a seat belt, or all these children have seat belts? I mean, seat harnesses, are they this on there, or do they?
Oh, daycare?
Yeah.
Daycare vans? I don't know if all the daycare vans have seat belts. Just like the school buses, we don't have seat belts on the school buses, so I don't know if all the daycare vans have seat belts. That'd be something I would have to find out.
But again, this is some type of sound alarm that he's hearing.
Alarm. Right.
Okay. Number 16.
Yes, ma'am. Representative Scott, okay, I'm trying to get my hands around this. I'm driving a daycare van, and I got 10 kids in the daycare van, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we go on a field trip, and we get to the place, and then all the kids get off, then all the kids come back on, then I take them back to the daycare, and once I turn the thing off and open the doors, all of a sudden I get this noise going beep, 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 beep that tells me that what I'm supposed to do is to get back up and to count all the children, right?
Well,
and to make certain, I mean, I guess what I'm saying is,
you need to walk the bus to make sure that
all this thing does is it's a reminder to me to walk the bus. Shouldn't this be part of a standing operating procedure anyway that the daycare puts into place? Like, I mean, it would seem to me that a common sense sort of thing would be that you give the bus driver a checklist and they check this thing off. Do most daycares not have that now? Or have we gotten to a point of where we have to have, I mean, I know I got a smartphone and it beeps for me all the time. It says in 15 minutes you got to go to Human Relations and Aging, but you know, I kind of miss that. I can go back to the days where I reach in and pull out my calendar and see it too. Would we not be probably cheaper and less burdensome to these small businesses that are trying to make it, to make certain that you know, that they give them the responsibility? If they're responsible enough to take care of kids, then they ought to be able to have this thing. Do you see what I'm saying?
I understand what you're saying, but I also understand that the cost of a life, of a child's life, when we have daycares that overlook it and it happens, and then we have a loss of a child. I know that as educators, they should do a head count and they should check, but sometimes it doesn't happen like that, and then we end up with the loss of a child. So I feel if they had some type of device to remind them to check the bus, then we could prevent a parent having to deal with the consequences of losing a child because of they have been left on the bus.
Yes, ma'am, and I understand that, and I you know, believe me, I couldn't fathom the loss of a child, and I understand all that, but somewhere along the line, personal responsibility has to come in too. Okay, thank you.
Number 11.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've talked about vans and we've talked about buses. How many child care facilities, particularly the private ones, actually have buses as opposed to vans?
Well, I guess
I mean, because if we're talking about a van, this buzzer, there's no aisle to get up and walk down to check. I mean, and there's no back door to open to trigger this mechanism, which is how it works. When the driver turns the ignition key off, that triggers the buzzer to ring, and it's deactivated when he gets to the back of the bus and opens the back door of the bus. That's the way this kind of an alarm works. Now, on a school bus in a K-12 environment, it is a part of the standard operating procedure at the end of every run, not just at the end of the day, but at the end of every load that a bus driver does. He is required, or she is required, to walk back through the bus and check for that. Now, do we know what the cost of this unit is?
No, I do not know the cost of it.
Or the maintenance cost, the installation costs?
No, but that'd be something we'll have to find out.
I tend to agree with the statement that this ought to be handled in terms of instructions to drivers before we start passing legislation that we don't even know the cost of at this point.
Number 12.
Mr. Chairman, my question was already asked. I was going to ask Representative Scott if she had an estimate of the cost.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, number 3.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Scott, isn't it true that there are several different types of alarm systems that are available that will differ in prices?
Well, yes, I'm sure the prices would differ.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And is it also possible that with this particular device, that the child care centers could actually receive a discount on their insurance for having this particular device installed?
Right.
Okay. And then also, my colleague in the back mentioned that you have to walk to the back of the van. There are systems that are available that actually, as you say, are voice activated with children's voices. There are those that are just beeping sounds, but there are ones that actually say, please check and be sure that all of my friends are off of the bus. Now, it's true that once you walk to the back of the bus or the van and open the door, you still have to push a particular button to turn it off. Is that also your understanding?
Yes.
Okay. And then finally, my understanding is that there is a process in place where you do have to check off the names, but we've heard from daycare centers and people who have worked and been charged with leaving children on the bus, that based on the number of children they're dealing with, based on being distracted, that is normally how our children get left on the bus. Is that your understanding as well?
Right.
All right, thank you.
Number 8.
I hear from some of my particular comment and suggestion for Representative Scott. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions from the panel on for the author of the bill? Okay. Thank you, Representative Scott. Okay, we have one person that signed up to speak on the bill, Alan Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I represent the Georgia Child Care Association, which represents over 700 child care owners and directors of daycare centers throughout the state. And we certainly appreciate the intent of this legislation. This is every center owner's nightmare because they don't get into this because they don't care about kids, and they do their best to protect and keep them safe at all times. However, you can actually go on CBS and see a piece that was on there just yesterday. The parent of the child that died on that bus, if the bus driver had simply followed the rules that DECAL already had in place, that child would not have died. The rules were already in place. This was human error. I also am aware of an instance in this year. The department acted very swiftly in response to that death and passed new rules and regulations in December, which actually does have an extensive checklist, which is far more effective. It does allow for providers to install these alarms as well, and if so, requires a qualified technician to install them. But they put in a checklist of things where you have to look below the seats, you have to look on the seats. It's very extensive, and you have to fill it out anytime you transport a child back and forth. I think these alarms can give a false sense of security in addition to the burden of the cost to an overly stretched industry. But they can give a false sense of security because I am aware of a driver that went back, and this happened in the last 6 months, went back, cut off the alarm, and then went and still left and missed a toddler that was left on that bus for 4 hours. So while in theory it feels like something that would help, in reality what's really more effective is the rule that DECAL put in place just in December that has very strict requirements, making sure that drivers are filling out those forms, that checking off every single detail, every seat, every underneath the seat, in the back behind the last seats. I think you also bring up, Chairman Dixon, an excellent point. Some center owners have vans, some have multifunction activities buses. If you have a multifunction activities bus, it is just like a school bus, and there are no seat belts in that. You're riding in a bus just like that, and it's got the same safety standards. If you have a 14-passenger van, then it does have seat belts, and you have to have booster seats in that van. So it doesn't make a lot of practical sense to have an alarm that one cannot get to in a van. And that varies from center to center. You all just increased the law last year so that any child under 8 has to be in a booster seat if it's a van and not a multifunction activities bus. But if you look at this industry, it's one that is stretched to the thinnest. We have seen over 1,000 centers shut down in 2009 and 10, and that's net. It's a loss of about 15,000 jobs in this industry, and it's a loss of about 50,000 child care placements. We're being asked already this year, in the coming school year, to serve another 10 days where providers have been given no additional operating cost in pre-K. In subsidized child care, we're reimbursing providers. We're paying at the 25th percentile, meaning the bottom 25th percentile of the rates in the current market rate survey instead of the 75th percentile, which is what the federal guidelines recommend. Given all that, and in light of this economic crisis, we believe that the rules that the department has already put forth are sufficient and actually more effective, because you are having to specifically go through that checklist and make sure you have examined every single seat on the bus, examined underneath the seats. That's something that buzzer is not going to help. And so we really believe that the rule that the department enacted in cooperation and collaboration with our industry is sufficient.
have some questions here. Number 3.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here today. And I had been doing the research on the update. If we could go back a little bit, and I realize you said that this particular list is more extensive. What was the requirement prior to the list being extended to having all of the particular checklists that you have now?
You know, I'm not exactly certain, and there's someone from the department who might be able to give you more information on that. We just worked on this rule in December to tighten it up to make sure, because, I mean, this was tragic for our industry. It breaks every center director's hearts, because this is your worst nightmare and your worst fear, that a child is forgotten. But I do know, and you can see the parent of the child that's referenced and that this bill is in memory of, on the CBS News just yesterday, saying if the center bus driver had only followed the rules that DECAL already had in place, my child would be alive today.
May I ask a question, please? Thank you. Do we have any idea, any numbers on, like, maybe the past 5 years, 10 years, how many children in Georgia have been left on buses or on vans as it relates to daycare centers?
I don't know if the department tracks that information or not, and so I would not be the right person. I wouldn't want to hazard a guess and give you incorrect information.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Number 15.
Ma'am, are you saying that you believe that even the child alarm was on there, it would not have saved this child?
No, because this was human error.
I mean, since you're saying, though, there was a protocol to follow, and it apparently wasn't followed,
yeah, the driver
this
didn't
would not
follow
have
it.
saved it either? Is that what you...
Yeah, right, because the reason the child died is because the person in charge of that bus did not follow the rules that DECAL already had in place.
Now, one last question. I'm not familiar with these alarm systems that beep and so forth, but if he doesn't go back there and open this door, as other representative said a while ago, how long will it beep? Will it continue to beep? Somebody outside the yard would see it, or is there any other?
No, I think it would be more likely that someone would have to be on the bus in order to hear it, and it may. I assume it would continue beeping until it exhausts itself. But as I said, in the last 6 months, we already had a center driver who went back there, shut that alarm off, and still left a toddler on a bus for 4 hours.
Number 6.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to just piggyback on a couple of questions that were already posed to you. In regards to you saying you don't know whether or not that would have saved a child's life, I know sometimes you can be distracted in life. Would you not say that's true? And so even when I get in my car, had it not been for my thing going beep, 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 I would not put my seatbelt on sometimes to trigger my mind, even though I know it's state law. So I don't know, exactly. Could you explain a little bit more about why you say it wouldn't have worked?
Well, we've got an instance where it didn't work, and if the laws and rules that DECAL had in place at the time of this child's death had been followed, the child would still be alive. That's why I'm saying this was true human error. DECAL already had rules in place that this person violated. Absolutely, people can be distracted, but we already have much lower ratios in child care of the number of people that can be on a bus with the children than regular school buses. I mean, even in the pre-K setting, we're held to a much stricter standard than the public schools are, because they can put them on a school bus, and we have to have, I believe it may be 1 to 14 ratio. So we have much smaller ratios in the private child care setting.
May I follow up with one question? Just one follow-up. So, saying all of that, do you think that maybe that we should always err on the side of caution? And Representative Bell asked you don't know the exact number of how many children have actually been hurt in Georgia or killed in Georgia because they have been left on a bus. Can you give us those numbers?
Well, I would be guessing. I mean, and so I don't want to do that. It's not 100. Now, if you want to talk about the number of children left on a bus, that's different. But in terms of the number of children killed from being left on a bus, I would presume it's in the single digits, because it gets our entire industry's attention when something like this happens. But again, I don't have that data at my fingertips, and I don't want to present false data. And I guess what I'm saying is, given that we've already had an instance where a bus driver went back, cut this alarm off, and a child was still left on the bus for 4 hours, I think the alarm provides a false sense of security, whereas the checklist, that is something that has to be turned into the center owner has to verify it, is a more real way of ensuring children's safety.
Okay. I'm just saying because, we know that the state law is to put on your seatbelt, and sometimes that little beep beep triggers our mind to fasten your seatbelt. So I just want to make sure that, we don't confuse facts when we say that you may know the guidelines, but you may not always follow them because you may be distracted. But thank you.
And
but
that,
thank
I'm
you.
sure that's, unfortunately what happened in the case of this death. They did not follow the rules, and that's why this little girl died unnecessarily.
Ms. Reynolds, if you'll wait just a minute, you said there's somebody here from the department. Could you come up and help us out on this just a few minutes?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Ray Higgins. I'm the Chief Financial Officer with the Department of Early Care and Learning, and also help out with legislative affairs. Not necessarily the total expert on the rules. Don't have that exact data with me on the transportation violations, but be happy to get that for you. As far as the rule changes you mentioned, I think the primary difference, I know the primary difference that was added afterwards, is if you're not using an alarm like this in our current rules, we now require an additional physical inspection. For example, let's say you're responsible for the vehicle and you went on a field trip. There was a checklist that was mentioned before, and now another person in addition to that, say the center director, has to come out and do a second physical inspection. So that's the change he was talking about. As far as the department, we don't have a position on the bill per se. At the same time, we certainly have no concerns. We realize that the intent behind the bill is certainly to attempt to improve child safety, and that's a concept that we greatly support. At the same time, we're sensitive to additional regulation or cost on providers and small business. Don't want to speak for them. It's not necessarily our role, but that is some feedback that we do receive. But again, we don't really have a position or any concerns. Be happy to implement whatever you all and the governor pass policy-wise and answer any questions.
Okay. Number 15.
Do you have any information or any statistics that shows where a child was left on the bus at that particular child's care center, then install the alarm?
I can check. I don't have those at my fingertips, but we can check. Certainly get a list of the various transportation and other violations that we have.
Number 16.
I guess I'm sort of wondering if maybe there is some more information that may be out there that as far as how many people have been left and some things that we could be looking at from that perspective. Is there a possibility of finding that?
Sure, we'll definitely get that soon. I do agree. My thoughts are that it's probably relatively small, but one's too many. But we'd be happy to get that information to the committee.
Thank you.
All right. Number 6.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so I have a question. Not children that just died, but could you tell us how many children have actually been left on the bus and parents have called in to complain, made a complaint, formal complaint?
That is exactly what I'll get you. I
Thank
don't
you.
have that, but we'll get the total violations of that nature and others if you like.
All right.
Mr. Chair. And is it possible, I don't know if this would be an action that you all would take, but to maybe give us some, and this may be Representative Scott, but just an idea of how much something like this cost for
Sure.
a daycare?
Sure.
Or, if you have daycares or centers that have already implemented this or have that, how much of a burden or an additional cost it has been for them?
Certainly. Be glad to do that, and Ms. Reynolds may have better information there on the spot, but I think it's probably $100 to $300 or so or something like that, but let me confirm that. I'm not sure.
Number 8. All right. Representative Hextall.
I think that your last comment kind of really got my attention when you said 1 to 300. That's quite a range. So I think that what you're really saying, you really don't have the numbers now.
Yes, sir.
And I really think that Representative Scott, as hard as she's worked on this bill, I would be concerned about putting numbers out like that, because I can understand what the lady that represents the daycare industry is concerned about, an additional mandate on her people, which she's hired and in a position to protect. But I also want to hear what I've heard several people here on both sides of the aisle, that all of us up here are concerned about children.
Absolutely.
And if it's at all possible that the device, and I'm asking Scott to forgive me, if it's at all possible for the device to be put in, and it wouldn't be a burden on daycares, because I understand people are dropping out, they're not getting the numbers, people aren't employed, so they can't obviously pay daycare. I understand that most industries are going through a turmoil at this time, but I certainly would like to see us do something, and I would like to, after we finish, Mr. Chairman, ask Representative Scott's permission to suggest something to her, if it's okay with you after they finish making their presentation.
All right. Anyone else have a question for Ms. Reynolds or? Okay. Representative Dixon.
Thank you. Do we have some knowledge at this point of what percentage of vehicles already have these installed?
I do not, but I will see if we have some of that information available. I know in light of this, there's certainly been a push towards installing more centers installing them just out of an abundance of caution. But just to give you an example of the stress it's under, there was an edict that came down from the feds this year that said all cribs had to be replaced. Now that's to the tune of easily $2,000 per classroom. And it was because there were some pack-and-plays that had been proven dangerous. So, but instead of differentiating them and keeping the cribs that were perfectly good, the feds came down and told us that we have to replace every single crib, and not only can we not donate those cribs anywhere, we must take them apart. So you add these mandates one after the other. You add 10 more operating days of pre-K, which is actually an opportunity cost because now we can't charge our normal rate, which is much higher than what the state reimburses for those classes. And I don't know if there's many industries, especially like this, where you're serving children, where you've seen this kind of shutdown on centers because of the stresses and the financial strains on the industry. And the mandates, there's another mandate and another committee that wants our centers to hand out flu shot information, vaccination information. Well, that you're talking at one more expense. We're supposed to put out information on the risks and the benefits of flu shots for children. And yet at the same time, we already have to have a communicable disease chart and collect all the vaccine information anyway, which we're not required to enter into the state database. So it's mandate after mandate after mandate, and while they're well-intentioned, when you are now required to have 2 people run the checklist on a bus, that's a better safety measure than this. And every time you add one of these, you're taking away from the program somewhere else. So you're taking away from the quality of the classroom instruction when you're adding this one more requirement that you have to, because there's not new dollars coming in at any, at any level.
Okay. Representative Hextall.
Mr. Chairman, I'll wait until her presentation is finished before
Okay. Representative Rogers.
Ms. Reynolds, are you pretty much finished with your presentation?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, are we at a point of where you would possibly entertain a motion?
Yes, I'll entertain that now.
Well, I've sat here and I think we're at a point right now. I can sit here and just look around at everybody, and all of us have children and grandchildren and everything else, and it's an issue that we're concerned with, and we all want to deal with, and we want what's best for kids. It's also a situation right now. I know how hard Representative Scott's worked on this bill, and with the right motives and right intentions. Representative Bell has asked for some more information. I'd like to see some more information. I think that the governor's office could provide that information. I think y'all could probably provide that information. And based on that, I'm just not comfortable just voting on this right now. I'd like to move that we table this to another time.
I'll have a motion to table. To have a second? All right, have a second. Okay. We will be meeting next Thursday, so we are tabling the motion till the next meeting. And if Ms. Reynolds, if you could, the information that they've requested, if you could bring that back to us, and people from the department, if y'all could have that for us, where we can make a little better, more educated decision on this than what we have right now. So, yes.
If I might, I'd like to see what the device looks like, what results have they gotten in other states, and I'd like to see some comparative information if we could, please.
Okay, Representative Scott, can you get that information for us? Okay, all right. We have a motion to table and a second. All those in favor, if you would, say aye. Opposed, like sign. We have tabled House Bill 857 until the next committee meeting date, which will be next Thursday at 4 o'clock. A room to be determined at a later time. And with no further business before the committee, we are adjourned.